I'm Lucas, 28 years old, and I haven't spoken to my father in over 2 years. Not really, anyway. He's called a few times. Once left a voicemail that just said, I was wrong. But by then, I was too far gone to care. And honestly, it didn't even make me feel better. Just empty. Like the man who raised me had finally admitted what I always feared, but only after everything was already burned to the ground. I never thought I'd end up here, alone, rebuilding from scratch, halfway across the country. But I also never imagined my own father would look me in the eye and say the words, walk away if you don't like it, after giving everything to my brother. Not half, not a portion, not a conversation, everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This all started long before the business, before adulthood, before college even. It started in small ways, like these things usually do. If you asked my dad, he'd swear up and down he raised both his sons the same. Gave us equal love, equal time, equal expectations. But if you lived in our house, if you were me, you'd know that was a lie so well rehearsed he probably believed it himself. My brother, Nathan, is 2 years older than me. Grew up with that firstborn glow, the natural leader aura. Captain of the high school football team, charming, always knew the right thing to say, especially when Dad was around. He knew how to perform. He knew how to win people. And Dad, well, he loved winners. I was the quiet one. Bookish. I didn't push boundaries, didn't get into fights, didn't argue when things felt unfair. I just swallowed it. I think I assumed things would even out eventually. That people like me, the loyal ones, the ones who put their heads down and did the work, would get noticed in the end. But that's not how it works when you grow up in someone else's shadow. Especially when the person casting it knows exactly how to make you disappear under it. Growing up, it was always Nathan who got the last word. If we both wanted something, he got it. When chores were being handed out, I'd get stuck with the garage or the yard while he'd supervise, which basically meant sitting in the shade with a soda while I hauled stuff. Dad called it delegating. Said Nathan had management potential. I remember once when I was 14 and had saved up money from mowing lawns around the neighborhood. I'd been eyeing this secondhand laptop from a pawn shop downtown. It wasn't much, but it would have been mine. I was so proud. I brought it home, beaming, and showed it off. Nathan asked if he could borrow it to finish a school project. I said sure. He never gave it back. When I finally asked about it, he said he needed it more, and that I was being selfish. I brought it up to Dad, thinking, maybe for once, he'd have my back. But Dad just shrugged and said, it's all in the family, right? Like my hard work didn't matter because it didn't go to his favorite. That was the first time I remember really feeling invisible. But not the last. In high school, Nathan got into a fancy private university. Dad took out loans, cashed in a part of his retirement, and celebrated with a steak dinner. When it was my turn to apply, I didn't even ask for the same support. I knew better. I picked a state school with a decent business program and took out loans myself. Dad called it being responsible. Nathan? He was ambitious. Still, I didn't complain. I studied hard, got good grades, worked part-time jobs. I wanted to earn everything on my own. Maybe deep down I thought if I proved I didn't need the support, I'd earn Dad's respect that way. Spoiler, I didn't. After college, I came back home for a bit to help with the family business, a mid-sized distribution company Dad had built from scratch. Nothing glamorous, but solid. The kind of business that kept lights on in dozens of homes. He always said he'd built it for the next generation. I just didn't realize he meant one specific person. Nathan showed up about a year after me, jobless, broke, and still full of swagger. He said the corporate world wasn't for him, and that he wanted to get back to his roots. Dad welcomed him with open arms. Said it was good to have both boys under one roof again. But soon enough, it was clear who was actually in the roof and who was just holding it up. While I ran inventory, built systems, and handled client relationships, Nathan got the cushy side. Big handshakes, power lunches, meetings with Dad about vision. If a decision was made, I wasn't in the room. If credit was handed out, it landed squarely in Nathan's lap. I once caught him taking a client I had spent weeks courting and claiming he'd closed the deal. When I confronted him, he laughed. Relax, Lucas, he said. It's a team effort. Right. Things reached a turning point the day Dad called us both into his office. I remember the sun slanting through the blinds, casting these long bars of shadow across the desk like a prison. He didn't mince words. I'm stepping back, he said, leaning back in that creaky leather chair he always refused to replace. And I've made a decision. Nathan will be taking over as CEO. Just like that. No lead up. No conversation. No. Lucas, I appreciate everything you've done. Just a declaration. Like I wasn't even there. I sat in stunned silence. Nathan smirked, already leaning forward like he owned the place. Dad went on about legacy, about Nathan having the drive, and how I was better suited for support roles. It was like a knife sliding in slow. When I finally found my voice, I asked, quietly, "So what happens to me?" Dad's eyes met mine, cold and matter-of-fact. "You're free to stay, but if you don't like the direction we're going, you can walk away." Walk away. Like I was just some temp. Like the years I put in, the loyalty, the sacrifices, none of it mattered. I sat there for a long moment. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just nodded once, stood up, and left the office. That night, I packed my things. I didn't even say goodbye. Not to Nathan. Not to Dad. I left a short letter on my desk, handed my office key to the night guard, and drove away from the only life I had ever known. It wasn't until weeks later that I got the first call. Then another. Then a desperate voicemail. Something had gone very, very wrong. And that's when things really started to get interesting. When I left that night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or throw a fit or smash anything on my way out. That wasn't me. I just drove. For hours. No destination in mind. Just letting the highway blur beneath me like I was trying to outdrive the ache in my chest. The pain wasn't sharp. It was hollow. Like a vacuum had opened up in my chest and sucked out everything I'd built over the last 10 years. All the weekends I stayed late. All the early mornings I opened the shop alone while Dad and Nathan were strategizing over brunch. Every time I bit my tongue instead of speaking up, I thought it was earning me something. Respect. Trust. Maybe a stake in the business one day. But it hadn't earned me anything. Not even a seat at the table. Eventually, I landed in a small town 3 states away, found a short-term rental with month-to-month rent, something low-key. Started freelancing a bit in logistics consulting to pay the bills. The kind of work that let me stay invisible. I needed that. Time to be alone. To process. I didn't tell anyone where I'd gone, not even Mom. And, yes, I should mention her. My mom passed away 5 years ago from a sudden stroke. It was one of those things that hit like a meteor out of nowhere. She was the buffer between Dad and me. The one who saw when something was unfair, even if she didn't always speak up. I think she did her best to protect me in small ways. Extra sandwiches in my lunch, quiet check-ins after Dad snapped at me for things he let Nathan slide on. After she died, it was like the last shred of balance disappeared from our home. Dad became harder, sharper, more certain that his way was the right way. And Nathan? He took it as a green light to do whatever he wanted. After I left, I expected them to go on without me. I figured Dad and Nathan would finally have their little kingdom, free of me dragging things down with my softness or overthinking. That's what Dad always called it when I tried to be thorough, when I asked questions or double-checked plans. He hated second-guessing, called it hesitation. He believed business was all about instinct, that gut feeling. I always thought it was about precision. I guess that made me expendable. But about 3 weeks after I disappeared, the calls started. First, 1 missed call from Dad's number. No voicemail. Then 2 more the next day. Then a text. "Call me." I stared at that message for a long time. Not out of anger. Not even out of pride. Just confusion. What could he possibly want? I hadn't heard a single word from him since that day in the office. No apology. No, "Are you okay?" Just silence. Now suddenly he wanted to talk? I didn't respond. A few days passed. Then came the voicemail. I still remember the exact words because I played them back more than once. Not out of sentiment, more like disbelief. His voice was trembling, genuinely shaken. "Lucas, it's your dad. I need to talk to you. Things aren't going well. Nathan's made a few bad decisions, and I need your help. Please call me back." Help. That word made me scoff out loud. I didn't call him back, but I started checking the company's website. Just curiosity at first. Then their social media pages, client reviews, industry forums. The cracks were showing. A few longtime clients had posted about late shipments. A couple hinted at miscommunications and mishandled inventory. One of our biggest vendors, a guy named Malcolm who always liked me, had posted something vague on LinkedIn about some companies forgetting who helped them get off the ground. Then came the first big headline in the local business journal. longtime distribution company facing major contract disputes. The article was thin on details, but it was enough to confirm what I already suspected. Nathan was running the business into the ground. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part just felt sad, because as much as that place hurt me, I had also loved it. I had built parts of it. The internal systems, the customer portals, the automated ordering logic, all of that was me. And now it was unraveling under the control of a man who didn't understand it. I kept my distance. I thought, let them learn the hard way. But then something happened that changed everything. A friend from back home, Emma, who used to work in accounting at the company, called me out of the blue. She'd been quiet since I left, probably afraid to get involved. But now she sounded frantic. "Lucas," she said, breathless, "I know you're trying to stay out of it, but you need to know what's going on." I hesitated. I figured Nathan's made a mess. "It's not just that," she said. He's blaming you." "What?" "I overheard him talking to some of the board members. He's been telling people the systems you built were flawed from the start, that you left him with a mess, and that's why things are falling apart. He even said you sabotaged the vendor relationships before leaving. He's rewriting everything." I sat there, stunned. That doesn't even make sense. "I know. Anyone who worked with you knows it's garbage. But the board? They're newer. They weren't around when you were handling logistics. They're buying it." Of course they were. Nathan had always known how to talk circles around people. And Dad? He probably let him. Or worse, encouraged it. Blaming me was easier than admitting they made a mistake handing the keys to the wrong son. "Thanks for telling me," I said quietly. Emma hesitated. "There's one more thing." I waited. "He found the files you left behind. Your planning documents. The business expansion model you were working on." My stomach dropped. "What about them?" "He presented them at the last strategy meeting. As his own." I couldn't even speak. "Lucas," she said, her voice shaking now, "he's stealing your work, and Dad is letting him. They're using your ideas, twisting them, and when it fails, they're blaming you." That was the moment something broke in me. This wasn't just about favoritism anymore. It wasn't about who got the title or who Dad liked better. This was theft. Lies. Public ones. And they were dragging my name through the mud to cover their own incompetence. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling in my little rental apartment, heart pounding, thoughts racing. I remembered every moment I'd stayed late at that office. Every time I held back a correction to avoid making Nathan look bad in front of Dad. Every bit of loyalty I had poured into that company. And now they were using my silence against me. I thought about reaching out to Dad, setting the record straight. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't want to talk. I wanted to watch them fall. And I wanted to make sure when they hit the ground, it was with the full weight of their own lies. The next day, I started planning. Not revenge, not exactly. I wasn't out to hurt them. I just wanted the truth to surface. And I knew where the bodies were buried, so to speak. Every vendor Nathan had ghosted, I knew their pain points. I had emails, contracts, backup files. Every client relationship they had fumbled, I still had contacts, notes, even performance reports that showed exactly who was responsible for what. And that strategy model Nathan stole? I had the originals. With timestamps. With metadata. With internal drafts that had my name all over them. But I didn't act yet. Because I wanted the timing to be perfect. I wanted them to feel safe first. To believe they'd gotten away with it. To sit on their little throne of lies, thinking the world would never catch up. And when they did, well, let's just say I had a plan. But even I wasn't prepared for what would happen next. A betrayal so blatant, so personal, that it would light the final fuse and turn my quiet departure into something else entirely. Something louder. Something final. Something they'd never forget. And it all started with one piece of paper I never should have seen. I didn't find the paper. It found me. It arrived in an envelope without a return address, postmarked from my hometown. At first, I thought maybe it was a letter from Dad, some pathetic attempt to justify what they'd done. But when I tore it open and saw what was inside, my entire chest went cold. It was a legal document. A notice of termination and revocation of equity intent, typed in sterile legalese and stamped with the family company's official seal. In short, it was a paper trail Dad never thought I'd see. A document officially removing any implied future stake I might have once had in the business. Not that I had anything concrete to begin with. No shares, no contracts. But this was different. This was them retroactively erasing me, covering their tracks, making sure that if, no, When the business collapsed, I couldn't claim that they had used my work or my foundation to prop it up. I stared at the document for what felt like hours. My name was printed right there on the header. Lucas Morgan. The language was precise, clinical. It referenced an internal memo Dad had apparently written, claiming I had voluntarily severed all claims, contributions, and advisory roles effective upon self-removal from the premises. Self-removal. That was how they framed it. As if I had just walked out, like some flaky intern. No mention of the closed-door betrayal. No record of the years I poured into building systems, processes, relationships. No word of gratitude. No acknowledgement. Just silence, signed and sealed. And the worst part? I might have believed I had no more tears left for them. But reading that, I felt it. That familiar sting behind the eyes. That lump in my throat. The ache you feel when the people who raised you decide you're a footnote. I didn't cry. Not really. But I sat still for a long, long time. Long enough for the sun to set. Long enough for my tea to go cold. Long enough for the anger to be replaced by something else. Resolve. If that was how they wanted to play it. If they wanted to erase me, fine. But I would become impossible to ignore. The first step was survival. No more scraping by on freelance work. I needed structure. I needed purpose. And I needed something of my own. I started with a notebook. A cheap spiral one from the drugstore down the road. On the front page, in shaky handwriting, I wrote 3 words. Build. Don't beg. It became my mantra. I dusted off the business model I designed while working at the family company. It was originally meant to expand our logistics footprint into mid-sized e-commerce brands. A scalable warehouse-to-door system with smart tracking and real-time adjustments. Nathan had stolen parts of it, the flashy parts, but he didn't understand how it all worked together. He presented the concept like a hotshot, but he'd gutted the engine and left only the shell. I, on the other hand, still had the real blueprint. The gritty, functional framework. I began reaching out, quietly. Old clients, vendors, colleagues. Not to poach, not yet. Just to reconnect. I asked about their pain points. I asked what they wished distribution companies actually understood. I asked what frustrated them the most. The answers were honest and consistent. They wanted reliability, flexibility, transparency, and above all, people who listened. So I listened. I spent the next 3 months working 16-hour days from my cramped apartment. Mornings were dedicated to client calls and networking. Afternoons were spent building the prototype system. Nights were research, branding, website design. I taught myself new software. I studied shipping trends. I ran simulations and stress-tested my model using mock data. I poured everything into it. No outside funding. No big launch party. Just me and that beat-up notebook with Build. Don't beg. On the front. Eventually, I filed the paperwork for my own company. Everlane Fulfillment. A clean name. Something that sounded honest. Simple. Built to last. My first real client came from an unexpected place. Malcolm. The same vendor who'd hinted at frustrations with my brother on LinkedIn. He'd always liked me. Always said I was the only Morgan who actually understood how things worked. We had coffee over Zoom. I showed him the system I built. He didn't even blink. I'm in, he said. As long as you're not planning to ghost me after 6 months like your brother did. I'm not my brother, I said quietly. And I meant it. With Malcolm came referrals. A small but steady stream of clients. I didn't try to grow too fast. That's how people crash. I kept it lean, clean, focused. I hired 2 freelancers, one for client relations, one for inventory control. Both were people I'd worked with before, people I trusted. We operated from a modest third-party warehouse just outside the city. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Efficient, honest, and it worked. 6 months after launching, Everlane was profitable. 9 months in, we were expanding to our second warehouse. A year in, we signed a partnership with a growing e-commerce fashion brand that had just gone viral on TikTok. Overnight, our numbers tripled. I remember staring at my dashboard that night, revenue climbing, fulfillment times dropping, client retention at 98%, and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the kind Dad used to dish out to Nathan like candy. Not performative, but real. Earned. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about becoming whole again. But that didn't mean I forgot. Because while I was building, I kept an eye on the Morgans back home. Quietly. Patiently. I saw the stories. The leaked emails from a disgruntled employee. The late shipments during the holiday rush. The failed rebrand attempt that was publicly roasted on Twitter for being tone-deaf and clunky. I saw the Yelp reviews drop, one by one. And then came the moment I hadn't expected, a message from Emma. "Lucas, you need to see this." Attached was a screenshot of an internal memo. It was from Nathan, dated just 2 days prior. In it, he blamed me again. For everything. For building fragile systems, for undermining vendor relationships, for abandoning the company at a crucial time. And this time, he CC'd the entire board. I read it 3 times, stunned. He was still using me as a scapegoat. Still feeding his version of events to people too lazy or too new to know the truth. I should have expected it. But what shook me more was the second screenshot Emma sent. An internal schedule. For an emergency investor roundtable. The company was hemorrhaging. They were calling in backup. And among the listed attendees? Malcolm, one of my clients. I stared at the name, confused. Why would he? Then it hit me. They didn't know I was working with Malcolm now. They were too arrogant to check. Or maybe they thought I'd vanished for good. Suddenly, I saw the opportunity. Not to attack. Not to gloat. But to reclaim. Because if they wanted to invoke my name behind closed doors, then it was time to show them exactly what I'd become without them. And this time, I wasn't walking away. I was walking through the front door. But before I could do that, one last thing had to fall into place. The truth. And it came, once again, in the form of a document. Only this time, I didn't receive it in the mail. I found it, hidden deep in an old shared drive from the company's cloud account that someone had forgotten to revoke my access to. One folder, 3 files, and what I read in those documents. It changed everything. Because it proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that Nathan hadn't just stolen my work. He had been funneling money. And the signatures on those invoices? They weren't just his. One of them belonged to Dad. And in that moment, I realized. This went deeper than favoritism. This wasn't just about being the overlooked son. This was about fraud. And I had the receipts. I leaned back in my chair, pulse steady. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one stuck in the shadows. And this time, they were about to see just how dangerous I could be when I stopped being quiet. I didn't sleep that night. The folder I found was buried under layers of old financial reports, cleverly mislabeled, like someone wanted to keep it hidden but not deleted. I had been locked out of most of the family company's systems when I left, of course, but one thing Nathan had never understood was how cloud permissions worked. I had created most of the internal architecture for the company's backend systems, including the shared drives. And someone, maybe him, maybe Dad, had overlooked a single shared folder still tethered to my old work email. An orphan relic. The moment I realized I still had access, my heart kicked in my chest. I'd clicked through mostly out of nostalgia at first. Habit. Curiosity. But what I found was a digital paper trail stretching back over a year, starting before I left. 3 separate shell companies with vague names like Crescent Logistics Group, Mira Holdings, and Bridgeport Sourcing, all receiving monthly payments from my family's company. Some for consulting fees, others for vendor services. But there were no invoices, no contact names, just account numbers. I wouldn't have thought twice if the numbers weren't so high. One payout was for $47,000, another for $62,500. Recurring, too. Every month, like clockwork. That in itself could have just been sloppy bookkeeping. But then I noticed the signatures. One was Nathan's, scrawled like he always signed things, with that lazy half-loop. The other? My father's. A rush of heat hit my face. For a moment, I thought maybe it was forged. Maybe Nathan had faked it. But as I pulled up an old file I had saved from a client contract Dad had signed in 2019, I compared the two. Identical. There was no doubt. Dad had approved those payments. To fake companies. With no product. No employees. No address. I cross-referenced the bank routing numbers using a public database. All 3 pointed to offshore accounts. Somewhere in the Cayman Islands. And suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't just a sinking business. It was a bleeding one. And my father, the man who once lectured me about integrity, about earning every cent, was the one holding the knife. I shut my laptop slowly and sat back, feeling like the entire world had tilted under me. How long had this been going on? Had my mom known before she died? Was this why Dad pushed me out so forcefully? Because he couldn't risk me stumbling onto the truth? The betrayal hit me deeper than I expected. Not because it was shocking, not really. I think part of me always knew my dad had a line he was willing to cross for Nathan. But this wasn't favoritism. This was criminal. And for the first time in my life, I had leverage. Real leverage. I didn't want revenge out of spite anymore. I wanted it out of principle. They had taken my loyalty and spit on it. Taken my silence and used it to launder their failures. They thought I had walked away for good. But I hadn't walked away. I'd stepped back. And now I was ready to step forward. The next morning, I made 3 calls. The first was to Emma. She picked up on the second ring. "Lucas, I found something," I said. "And I need you to listen carefully." I told her everything. Not just the shell companies and the payments, but the signatures. The way they'd been siphoning money and hiding it behind dummy corporations. Emma, to her credit, didn't panic. She was sharp. Always had been. "That explains so much," she said after a beat. "Some of the accounts weren't balancing. I thought it was just sloppy reporting. But this makes it all make sense. I need copies of any financial discrepancies you've seen, even vague ones. Anything with missing vendors or unverified invoices. You still have access, right?" She hesitated. "I could get them. But if they find out—" "They won't," I said. "Not yet. Just gather what you can. Quietly. You'll be protected when this comes out. I promise." She was silent for a long moment, then said, "Okay, I'm in." The second call was to Malcolm. He answered gruffly, mid-drive from the sound of it. "I was expecting your call," he said. "Saw your brother's meltdown in the investor meeting yesterday. The man can't keep his lies straight to save his life." "I need to ask you something," I said. "Did they offer you equity?" He paused. "Yeah." Nathan floated the idea. Said he needed a stabilizing partner while they restructured. "Of course he did. And you didn't take it?" I asked. "I told him I'd think about it," Malcolm said. "Wanted to see what you'd do first." I had a hunch there was more going on. "There is," I said. "And I can prove it. But when the time comes, I'll need you to confirm what you just told me. On the record." Another pause. Then he said, "You got it." The third call was to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Claire. She used to work for my dad's company as a junior analyst before getting poached by a financial compliance firm in the city. We weren't close, just friendly, but she'd always respected my work ethic. And more importantly, she hated corruption. It was kind of her thing. I texted her before I called. She answered in 5 minutes. "Lucas Morgan," she said, voice suspiciously chipper. "This is either going to be about your new startup or something that'll get me fired." "Maybe both," I said. By the end of the conversation, she had agreed to review the documents and offer her professional opinion. Unofficially, of course. "Send me everything," she said. "And Lucas? If you're right, this is way bigger than a family feud." I compiled everything I had. The folders, the invoices, screenshots, backups. I spent the next week moving with care. I created a private cloud folder labeled Project Silence. Ironic, considering what it held. I encrypted the files, created multiple backups. One on a hard drive in a safety deposit box. Another with a lawyer friend I trusted in another city. No more keeping all my secrets in one place. And then, I waited. Because I knew something else was coming. Something big. And sure enough, it came. On a Thursday morning, my phone lit up with a notification. An article in the Regional Business Journal. Morgan Distribution appoints external consultant to prevent bankruptcy. The company had lost 3 major clients in a single week. Vendor relations were strained. 2 board members had stepped down, citing ethical concerns. The article didn't name Nathan directly, but it didn't have to. The smell of blood was already in the water. I called Malcolm. "Are you ready?" I asked. "I've been waiting," he said. And then I made my move. I didn't go to the press. Not yet. I went to the board. I knew 3 names on the list from my time at the company. 2 of them had liked me. One was neutral. I sent them an anonymous tip through a clean email, VPN masked. I attached just enough to raise alarm bells. And within 48 hours, I got the response I wanted. An internal audit was triggered. Nathan tried to spin it as due diligence. Said he welcomed the transparency. But I could see it in his eyes when the first photos hit LinkedIn. Board members arriving unannounced. The twitch in his smile. The way Dad stood stiffly beside him in every photo, no longer leading, just appearing. Because the reins were slipping. And they knew it. Emma sent me a text late that night. "They're freaking out. Meeting tomorrow. Closed doors. I'm staying late. I'll listen in if I can." My reply was short. "Be careful. You're not alone." The next day, Malcolm called me again. "They're asking me to join the board, he said, sounding amused. Can you believe that? They're trying to buy time. Well, I told them I'd consider it, he said. On one condition. What's that? He chuckled. That you come with me. I blinked. What? I told them I'd only join if you returned as head of logistics. Consultant, partner, whatever title makes sense. Told them if anyone could salvage their mess, it was the guy they let walk out the door. You should have seen Nathan's face. I'm not going back, I said automatically. I'm not stepping foot in that building. You might not have to, he said, but you should be in the room when it all falls apart. I didn't give him an answer right away. Instead, I called Claire. How soon can you verify everything? I asked. I already did, she said. Sent you a full report. If you release this publicly, they'll be lucky if it stops at a lawsuit. I opened the file she'd sent. It was clean, detailed, bulletproof. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled through it. This was it. Everything I'd been waiting for. But I had to time it right. Because the final move, that had to be mine. And I wanted to make sure when I played it, there was no way for them to get back up. Everything was in place. The files were reviewed and verified. The paper trail was airtight. Claire's analysis left no room for misinterpretation. Nathan and my father had been funneling hundreds of thousands into shell accounts over the course of more than a year. Emma had quietly confirmed that the internal audit was already raising eyebrows, and Malcolm had not only secured his position on the board, he'd managed to wedge the door open just wide enough for me to peek in. But I wasn't interested in rejoining the company. I wasn't coming back as a consultant. I wasn't going to offer advice, guidance, or forgiveness. This wasn't a comeback story. It was an execution. Friday, 9 a.m. That was the time of the next closed-door board meeting. The one where Nathan planned to propose emergency layoffs, selling off warehouse leases, and, according to Emma, restructuring the leadership hierarchy to cut out inefficiencies. That was corporate speak for getting rid of anyone who still questioned him. I dressed in a plain black button-up and dark jeans. Professional, but neutral. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to be taken seriously when I walked in. Because I was going to walk in. Malcolm made sure of it. When I arrived at the building, the one I had practically built with my bare hands and sweat-soaked evenings, the security guard didn't blink. He buzzed me through the front entrance like it was 2018, and I was still the dependable kid showing up early. Emma met me just outside the conference room, her expression tense but energized. They don't know you're here, she whispered. Malcolm's stalling. Good. I walked past the glass wall and paused before entering. Through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes. Nathan pacing. Dad sitting stiffly, arms crossed. Board members in varying states of exhaustion and discomfort. Then Malcolm raised his hand, as if to speak. That was my cue. I opened the door. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Chairs squeaked. The silence was a tangible thing. Thick, shocked, slightly confused. Nathan's face drained of color. Lucas. Dad's voice was thin, like the wind had been knocked out of him. Hi, everyone, I said calmly, walking to the far side of the room. I didn't sit. I stood, hands resting lightly on the back of an empty chair. Thanks for making time. Nathan was the first to recover. What is he doing here? He snapped, turning to Malcolm. This is a private. He's here because I invited him, Malcolm cut in smoothly. I told you I wouldn't finalize anything unless Lucas was in the room. Thought I made that clear. Nathan scoffed, trying to laugh it off. He doesn't work here anymore. He walked out, remember? Actually, I said, sliding a slim folder from my bag and placing it on the table, I was pushed out. Conveniently right before the financial misconduct started. The room stilled again. What is that? One of the board members asked. I opened the folder and handed the printed copies of Claire's report to each board member. Then I placed a USB drive in front of Malcolm. What you're looking at is a verified financial audit. Independent, neutral, and cross-referenced with the company's own bookkeeping, outlining over $720,000 in unaccounted transactions. I let the words sink in. And where did that money go? Another board member asked, skeptical. To 3 shell companies, I said, owned by the same offshore trust, all connected to personal accounts in the Cayman Islands. Accounts controlled by Nathan Morgan. Nathan stood abruptly, his chair screeching back. That's a lie. This is slander. No, I said calmly. It's not. And if you check the timestamps on the documents, you'll see something else. I pulled one final page from the folder. A copy of one of the approval memos. It had both their signatures. This one was co-signed by William Morgan, my father. Dad didn't say a word. His hands twitched slightly. His eyes darted across the table, looking for an escape, maybe, or a way to spin it. But he saw what I saw. No one was buying it. One of the board members leaned forward, flipping through the report. These numbers. This is real. It's real, Malcolm confirmed. I had it reviewed independently. Everything matches. Dad finally spoke, but his voice was strained. I didn't know where the funds were going. Nathan told me it was for contractor services. He said it was a temporary solution. I finished. Funny, because you both signed off on it for 14 straight months. I trusted my son, he said, eyes flashing. I stared at him, cold and steady. You had too. That shut him up. Nathan tried again, desperate now. This is a setup. He's trying to frame me. He's always hated that I got the promotion. Enough, one of the board members said, slamming her hand on the table. We've seen enough. Another board member leaned over and whispered something to the legal counsel in the room. Emma sent me a look from the corner, barely able to contain her satisfaction. Malcolm stood, cleared his throat, and adjusted his blazer. As an acting board member, I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in CEO Nathan Morgan. Effective immediately. The vote took less than 2 minutes. 5 in favor. 1 abstain. 0 against. Just like that, Nathan was out. He stared around in stunned silence, like he couldn't believe it. Like the crown had just slipped from his head and shattered on the ground. I built this company, he hissed at me. You were nothing without me. No, I said. You were nothing because of me. You built your whole identity on being the golden boy, the favorite, the one Dad could count on. But you never did the work. You just took credit for it. I stepped forward, lowering my voice. You think you can lie your way through life, cheat people, manipulate your family, and come out clean on the other side? You can't. Dad was silent. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. And for once, I didn't need them to. Because the revenge wasn't about seeing him cry or watching Nathan beg. It was about this moment, standing in the room they tried to keep me out of. Not as a son or a brother, but as the man who brought the truth. The fallout was fast and merciless. Nathan was removed from all company systems by noon that day. Legal counsel began proceedings within a week. Investigations into the offshore accounts deepened. Within a month, the IRS and corporate fraud division were involved. Emma forwarded me the notices discreetly. I never asked for the updates. They just came. Dad resigned a few weeks later. Quietly. No press release. No farewell letter. Just gone. He left the state shortly after. I don't know where he lives now. I don't care. Nathan tried to spin a comeback on LinkedIn a few months later, some vague post about learning through adversity and growth through failure. The comments were brutal. A former vendor roasted him publicly. A former intern called him a walking masterclass in arrogance. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had moved on. Everlane Fulfillment expanded into 2 new regions within the year. Our reputation for transparency became our greatest strength. Clients stayed loyal. Employees were valued. I started mentoring a few young entrepreneurs on the side, the quiet ones. The ones who worked hard and kept their heads down, thinking it would be enough. I taught them what I had to learn the hard way. Build. Don't beg. And one day, while cleaning out an old box of files, I found that first spiral notebook again. The one I started with. The words on the front cover were faded but still legible. I smiled. Then I tossed it in the trash. Because I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't building to prove anything. I had already won.